Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Mary Margaret if you're new here, and if you are a returning subscriber, welcome back. Today I am doing a review of one of my new favorite books, Wives and Daughters. I read this book last year and I have been meaning to do a review of it for quite a while now, and I am finally getting around to filming this because I want to convince as many of you as I can that you need to read this book. This is the book. It's called, as I said, Wives and Daughters, and it is by Elizabeth Gaskell. Now, if you are sort of familiar with the name, you may have heard of her from her other book, which is called Cranford, or you may have heard of her from the book called North and South, which is one of my personal favorites of hers as well. It is probably a third of the length of this book, but I'm going to do my best to make it to where you're not as intimidated by the length of this book. I would also point out that this edition is a bit older, so the pages themselves are thicker than most books nowadays are. Thus, it's not quite as long as it appears to be from this edition here. So I wanted to first include a few of my favorite quotes from the book. If you do get to read the book, I think you will find that the quotes are even more powerful within the context of the actual story. So if I'm looking down, it is because I'm reading the quotes, and then also I have notes on my computer, so I am trying to make sure that I get to all of the different points that I wanted to originally when I created this outline. The first quote is, "I dare say it seems foolish. Perhaps all our earthly trials will appear foolish to us after a while. Perhaps they seem so now to angels. But we are ourselves, you know, and this is now, not some time to come, a long, long way off. And we are not angels to be comforted by seeing the ends for which everything is sent." So I felt like that was particularly relevant to 2020 and the current year 2021. This one is another quote that I loved. "How easy it is to judge rightly after one sees what evil comes from judging wrongly." Hindsight is 2020. And then the last quote is a funny one that I just love, and it is said by one of my favorite characters, and I'll talk about him a little bit more in just a minute. "I won't say she was silly, but I think one of us was silly, and it was not me." Which is Squire Hamley to a T. In this book, I think one of the first things that's important to talk about is the characters. The characters in this book are some of the best that I've encountered in any literature anywhere. You have such a wide range of characters, and they range from all ages to all backgrounds, and I absolutely love that. So if you are a fan of Jane Austen and you enjoy reading about society and the different classes and all of the sort of hierarchies that are contained within British society, particularly around like the 1600s through the 1800s, that sort of thing, this is a book that you will enjoy. One of my favorite things about this is how it calls attention to a lot of the really ridiculous parts of the different classes in society and how hypocritical people were and all of that sort of thing. I absolutely loved how we had characters to love in the upper classes, the middle classes, and also in the lower classes. It was just a really nice thing to see, and I feel like you'll see that in all of Elizabeth Gaskell's books. But this was also the case with Wives and Daughters. I want to start out by talking about Molly Gibson. She is the protagonist of this story, and even though she's not always the main focus, her life and her story is the main focus by the end of the book. You will find that everything that is told throughout the book, even if she doesn't seem to be involved, is going to involve her in one way or another. Now, this story starts at the beginning of Molly's young adulthood, when she's probably like a preteen. And we move past that point by about, I think, 6 or 7 years, and we kind of jump from her young adulthood into her young womanhood. And we follow her life from that point onwards and all of the different trials and tribulations that you have in that time period when you're adjusting to being a woman. What I love about Molly Gibson is that she is the kind of character who is just a delight to read about because she is a good person, and she is a good person who is not annoying. And by that I mean I have read about so many good characters who are just obnoxious because they're so perfect and they never do anything wrong, and that's just not realistic. It's just not at all realistic. For example, A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I also could think of quite a few characters in Louisa May Alcott's books, not the Little Women series or anything like that. I'm talking more about An Old-Fashioned Girl or even Eight Cousins and Rose in Bloom. things like that. You have these young women who just really don't do anything wrong. And I know growing up, those were really frustrating characters for me to read about, because I was like, well, I can't relate to that because I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And I love that Molly is a good person and she tries to be a good person, but she fails. And that is life. That's how we are. We are humans and we fail and we make errors of judgment. And we see that Molly fails and she makes these mistakes, but she learns from them and she grows from them and she tries to be a better person as a result. And one of the things that Elizabeth Gaskell does that I just loved is that we get to see inside of Molly's mind her thought processes, where she'll think something that's not a very nice thing to think, and then she thinks about how that wasn't a nice thing to think and she needs to do better. But it's not in such a way that it's like overly moralistic. And I feel like it just is a really nice thing to see. But aside from that, Molly is just the kind of character you root for. You want everything good to happen to her. And I will say, without giving any spoilers, that that is not always going to be the case. And that is the main frustrating thing about this book, is that Molly goes through quite a bit in this book. And so I think that's something that's good to know going into the book. Now, the main plot of this story, before I move into any of the other characters, is that Molly is a young woman who, her father is all alone. He's being a single parent because her mother dies at a very young age for Molly. And so as a result of that, Dr. Gibson, her father, is having a lot of trouble trying to figure out how best to ensure that Molly has the life that she deserves. And so it kind of follows that whole idea. And what I love about this is that the primary focus of this book, as the title would indicate, would be wives and daughters, right? But I think one of the main things about this book is actually just parental relationships in general with their children, because almost all of the strongest relationships in this book are about fathers and their sons and mothers and their daughters. But also, I would say fathers and daughters as well as mothers and sons. Like, it's all of those different relationships. So definitely not exclusive to wives and daughters, which I think makes the title a bit misleading. Now, the next thing I'm going to say might be a bit of a spoiler. If you are wanting to go into this with no knowledge of the plot, then feel free to skip forward. But I will go on and put my book down, and when I put it back up, the spoiler will be over. Basically, the stage is set for the rest of the story when Molly's father, Dr. Gibson, decides to remarry so that Molly will have a mother and she will have a sister, because the woman that Dr. Gibson marries has a daughter from a previous marriage. And events unfold from there. And that is when things start to get quite dramatic, as you will soon find out if you read the book. Now, Dr. Gibson is by far my least favorite character in this book. I understand completely that what he does for Molly's own good, and I know he's trying to be a good father, but I find him to be incredibly restrictive, very annoying in a lot of ways, and I think that he should talk to Molly more and actually consult her instead of talking to people who don't know Molly that well and don't know their situation very well and making decisions based on that. And I also think that he makes a lot of decisions that are just not fair, and he frustrates me a lot. He's also the one who says some very offensive things, and yes, those are the only really objectionable things in this entire book, and they are the things that are said by Dr. Gibson. I do think that there are a few statements worth mentioning that are said also by Hyacinth, and that's a character I'm about to talk about, so just wanted to give you a warning on that. Unfortunately, there are some statements that are not appropriate in any setting and are very offensive. In terms of other characters, I really did find Hyacinth and her daughter Cynthia to be very frustrating. I do find that they're very important to the plot though, and they are really good foils, so I do think they're definitely necessary, but those are the people other than Dr. Gibson who will frustrate you the most, so just a heads up on that. Hyacinth is a character who cares mostly about money, station in society, and also about being right and being pampered. She wants the best in life, and so far she has had a very difficult life, and so her goal is to make it to where her daughters are able to have all the things she couldn't have, and if she can have them herself in addition to her daughters, that's just a bonus that she's very excited about. She is a very, very selfish character. Her daughter Cynthia is very much like her mother, and this is why the two of them get so frustrated with each other and get so angry with each other, and that is because they don't understand each other even though they are so similar, which is really how it is in real life too. We have all these people in our lives, and sometimes the people we don't get along with are the ones we are most like. And it's because we can't understand other people who are like us, because oftentimes we don't even understand ourselves. Now, Lady Harriet, I absolutely adore Lady Harriet. She is the character who does no wrong in my mind. I think she's absolutely hilarious, and I just love how she speaks her mind and doesn't care what people think and just does whatever she wants to. She's a really fun character who befriends Molly and helps her out when she's having a difficult time of things. The Hamleys at Hamley Hall, where Molly goes to make friends with Mrs. Hamley, who is Squire Hamley's wife, they are just all such great characters. I found Osborne to be such a Byron-esque character. Roger Hamley, who is Osborne's brother, is such a wonderful character, and I will say you probably will get angry with him at one point or another, but you can't be too angry with him for too long, because at his very core, he is just a lovely person. And I loved how he supports Molly throughout this book, all of the different times that she goes through that are so difficult. And I just love their relationship, the conversations they have, and I love that he encourages Molly to pursue intellectual things and to enjoy reading and learning about science. And I feel like that's very forward thinking for this time period, and I love that about this. And how he tells her that she can have free reign in their library and all of those different things. I just thought that was absolutely lovely. And it is really quite fascinating to watch how all of those dynamics unfold. My favorite thing about this book, aside from the characters, was just the setting in general. The descriptions of the places and how they lived were so detailed and so delightful to spend time in, and I felt like I became part of their society, and I absolutely loved that. When it comes to this story, I think one of the best things to think about is that the plot is really not the central focus of this story. The characters are. And one of the reasons that I love this book so much is because it really is very realistic, and it makes it feel like I am going back in time and I am spending time with these lovely people in Hollingford, which is the small town where this all takes place. And it's just really fun, and I love observing society, seeing the world through all of these different people's eyes, and I love how the focus shifts from chapter to chapter to different characters. And I think that's really one of the things that made it such a perfect read for me last year, is because obviously we weren't really going anywhere, and it felt like this was such a peaceful book that took place with so little going on, but also at the same time so much going on at the same time. And I think one of the best things about it is that the people in this book were satisfied with so little. Their lives are so simple, and yet they were very happy and very contented in their own ways. And most of the time they spend time inside talking to one another, reading and sewing, which sounds pretty amazing to me, and I just love reading about that. Most of the events that take place are dances, and I found that to be a really fun thing to see. That, or like card games, that they would have nights where they would play card games. And I'm not really describing this as very exciting, but that's really not the point. The whole point of this book is all of the different conversations, all of the different dynamics, the emotions that are felt by the different characters and people's motivations, and all of these observations on human nature that are just so honest, but also so real. And I think, you know, we've all noticed the things that Elizabeth Gaskell describes in this book, but the difference is that we've never really articulated them the way that she does. And that's really one of the things that makes this such a powerful book, in my opinion, is that it makes the characters so real, and that's because she's so good at painting the scene and setting it for us in such a way that it just, you can't help but care about the characters. Now that I've rambled about so many different things that probably don't make very much sense unless you actually have decided to read the book, I wanted to mention a few things. First of all, before you read the book, I would actually encourage you to watch the miniseries. This is really a different thing for me to say, because usually I will say, no, you must read the book first. The miniseries, though, actually is what made it to where I wanted to read the book, and it really enriched my experience with the book because this is so long and it is quite a slow-paced book that if you don't know how it was going to end and how good it was going to be, you might lose patience. And I think the miniseries just adds a whole layer of appreciation that I probably wouldn't have had before. The casting for the miniseries is absolute perfection. There are just so many wonderful things about it, and I absolutely loved everything. The music is gorgeous, the costumes are incredible, and the location and all of nature in it, I just loved. The person they cast to play Roger is perfect. I adore Michael Gambon as Squire Hamley. He was excellent. And Justine Waddell as Molly is so good. And also it has a couple of my other favorite actresses. So it has Keely Hawes as Cynthia. Hyacinth is played by Francesca Annis, and I absolutely adore her, and she's so perfect in that role. And I just think the other thing that's excellent about it, and it's good to know, is that Wives and Daughters was unfinished. The very last part of the book was not written because unfortunately Elizabeth Gaskell passed away before she could finish writing the book, which is an absolute tragedy. I just wish I knew how everything would have been wrapped up, but thankfully for the most part this is completed as much as you need it to be. But it's frustrating. I think that the miniseries did an excellent job of completing the story for us, and it's just absolutely wonderful and I love it. So I would actually recommend that you go watch it and then read this and love it because it's absolutely amazing. So aside from all of my rambling, why should you read this book? First of all, it is such an excellent writing about human nature. I feel like, again, the observations are just incredible, and I feel like Elizabeth Gaskell always has so many wonderful things to say and so many different philosophies that she just kind of sprinkles throughout that are absolutely wonderful. I just adored it. The second thing I would say is it's worth reading as kind of this exploration of society at that time period because everything is laid out in such detail, but it never is boring. I always was enjoying reading about their tea, how they had tea, or their gardens, or how they kept their land, or even if it was something about what they enjoyed reading at this time period or what they were sewing. I still found it all to be really, really interesting, and that's because Gaskell just writes so well. But the last thing I want to say is that I have been inspired to read pretty much anything Elizabeth Gaskell ever wrote as a result of reading this book because I have only ever read North and South, which is the other book that I love of hers. That miniseries is also absolutely incredible. And I am hoping to reread it this year and post a review where I talk more about it as well. But I just love how this book talks about relationships. And that's one of the things I talked about earlier. I love that it does have love stories in it. And I love the main love story in it, which I don't want to talk about because spoilers. But the thing that I think is so wonderful about it is that it talks about relationships between parents, and it talks about, marriages. It talks about parents and their children. It talks about relationships between siblings. It has all sorts of things about friendship as well. And I think that's so important because we always have so much emphasis on all of these different relationships, particularly romantic relationships, but it's really important to place an emphasis on family and friends as well because those are such a significant part of our lives. And I just love that she talks about what makes a successful relationship and what does not. And that it has these conversations about virtue and about being a good person without hitting you over the head with it, which is really something that's difficult to achieve. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review. I know this is all over the place and probably very chaotic, but I just wanted to kind of gush about this. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Honestly, I almost want to just turn around and reread it, even though I just kind of meandered through it for like 8 months last year and finally finished it after that period of time. I kind of want to just like jump back in and rewatch the miniseries because it is such a wonderful world to escape into, and I just love the people in it so much. And if I could convince you to read it in any way, I just want to because I think it's that wonderful. If you've read it, please comment below and let me know. And if you are interested and have any questions after all the things I just said that probably didn't make very much sense, also let me know. And I would highly recommend this edition now that I've been waving it in your face for the whole video. This is the Barnes & Noble edition, and the text is a really nice size, and it has footnotes and also quite a few notes at the end, which is very helpful if you're not as familiar with books that take place, you know, hundreds of years ago. It has a lot of helpful contextual information, and then also the footnotes have translations for phrases that are just kind of thrown in French, as you do at this time period apparently in England. And then lastly, it also has information about quotes that are put in here from different literature, whether it's poetry, a random book, or a classical tale. And yes, I just love this book so much. Can you tell? I'll stop waving it in your face now. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you made it through this whole video, please let me know, because I will be very impressed and also very appreciative. And I really am excited to talk about this book with you all because I just think it's so wonderful, and I hope this video convinced you to give it a try. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Goodbye.